Relying on God in times of difficulty. C.S. Lewis, one of the most influential Christian thinkers of the 20th century, often spoke about the deep yearning within the human heart that cannot be satisfied by anything in this world. This idea, central to Lewis's theology, reflects the notion that we were made for something beyond this earthly life. Our desires for meaning, fulfillment, and joy are not meant to be fully satisfied by material wealth, success, or even relationships, but point us toward a higher reality, an eternal relationship with God. In his book Mere Christianity, Lewis famously states, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." This quote encapsulates Lewis's belief that our deepest longings reveal a divine purpose. These desires are not wrong or misguided, but they are often misdirected when we seek to fulfill them with the temporary and fleeting pleasures of this world. According to Lewis, earthly pleasures are gifts from God, but they are not the ultimate end. They are meant to awaken in us a longing for something more, something eternal. From a Christian perspective, this something more is the kingdom of God, a place of eternal peace, love, and communion with our Creator. The very fact that we experience dissatisfaction in life is a signpost, pointing us toward God. The frustration we feel when things don't go our way, or when the joys of life are short-lived, is a reminder that this world is not our final home. Lewis saw this tension between earthly life and divine calling as a crucial part of the human experience, emphasizing that our longing for more is a natural result of being made in the image of God. In the face of life's hardships, we often find ourselves clinging to worry and anxiety, feeling overwhelmed by circumstances we cannot control. Yet, Scripture, and the Christian faith as a whole, invites us to cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you, 1 Peter 5 verse 7. Lewis understood that trusting in God's providence, His plan and care for our lives, is a vital step toward experiencing true peace. However, letting go of our worries is often easier said than done. We are naturally inclined to rely on our own strength and understanding, thinking we can manage life's struggles on our own terms. Lewis pointed out that this tendency comes from pride, the belief that we are better equipped than God to handle our own problems. But pride, as Lewis warned in The Problem of Pain, is one of the greatest barriers to experiencing God's love and peace. When we hold on to pride, we resist the very thing that can bring us freedom from worry, God's grace. To relinquish control, to lay down our burdens, is an act of humility. It requires acknowledging that we are not capable of solving every problem or managing every challenge by ourselves. Instead, we must recognize that God, in His infinite wisdom and love, is far more capable of carrying our burdens than we are. Lewis's theology was deeply influenced by the Christian understanding of humility and faith. For him, letting go of anxiety was not a passive act of resignation, but an active step of faith. Trusting in God does not mean ignoring life's problems or pretending they don't exist. Instead, it means bringing those problems to God and trusting that He is at work, even when we cannot see it. This act of faith transforms the way we experience suffering. Rather than being crushed by the weight of our worries, we can find strength in the knowledge that God is in control. In his work The Problem of Pain, Lewis reflects on the role of suffering in the Christian life. He does not shy away from the reality of pain and hardship, but he encourages believers to see suffering as an opportunity to draw closer to God. Suffering, in Lewis's view, is not evidence of God's absence, but of His active involvement in our lives. God uses our trials to shape us, to draw us nearer to Him, and to refine our faith. When we hold on to our worries, we are resisting this process. We are choosing to trust in ourselves rather than in God's plan. Lewis often emphasized that God's providence is not always immediately understandable from a human perspective. We may not see the purpose behind our suffering or understand why certain prayers seem to go unanswered. Yet, as Lewis explained, this is where faith comes in. Faith is not the absence of doubt or fear, but the decision to trust in God despite those doubts. In Mere Christianity, Lewis wrote, "Faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods." Our feelings may shift, and our circumstances may be uncertain, but God's love and care remain constant. To fully trust in God's providence requires a daily commitment. Lewis was keenly aware that the Christian journey is not a one-time decision but a continual process of surrender. Every day presents new challenges and new opportunities to trust God. As he put it in Mere Christianity, relying on God has to begin all over again every day. As if nothing had yet been done. This daily reliance on God is what brings peace in the midst of life's storms. It is not about achieving a state of perfect trust all at once but about taking each day as it comes and trusting God with that day's challenges. The Christian faith teaches that God's providence is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own plans or desires. In the Gospels, Jesus reminds us, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Matthew 6 verse 34. Lewis understood that worry does not add anything to our lives, it only detracts from the peace that God offers us. When we let go of our worries and place our trust in God, we open ourselves to the joy and freedom that comes from living in His grace. In summary, Lewis's Christian theology calls us to release our anxieties and place our trust in God's providence. Our deepest desires point us toward a reality beyond this world, a life in communion with God. While it can be difficult to let go of control, doing so is an act of faith that leads to true peace. By trusting in God's plan and relying on His grace, we can experience the freedom and joy that we were created for, even in the midst of life's difficulties. Anxiety hinders peace. C.S. Lewis, a profound Christian thinker, often explored the themes of faith, trust, and surrender in his writings. One of the central ideas he emphasized is that holding on to anxiety and worry reflects a lack of trust in God's promises. Lewis believed that anxiety creates a barrier between us and the peace that God desires for us. In his view, true peace can only be found when we let go of our worries and place our full trust in God's providence. In Mere Christianity, Lewis discusses how pride often prevents us from surrendering fully to God. Holding on to worry, in many ways, is an expression of pride. It suggests that we believe we are responsible for controlling our lives. That we can fix every problem ourselves. But this mindset distances us from God's grace. Lewis explained that when we cling to anxiety, we are essentially refusing to trust in God's plan, thinking that we know better or that we must bear all the burdens alone. According to Christian theology, however, this is not the path to peace. The Bible repeatedly encourages believers to trust in God and to cast their worries onto Him. In 1 Peter 5 verse 7, we are told to cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. This idea of casting our burdens onto God is key to understanding the peace that comes from surrender. Lewis highlighted that letting go of our worries is not about ignoring our problems or pretending they don't exist. Rather, it is about acknowledging that we are not in control, and that's okay because God is. For Lewis, surrendering our worries to God requires both faith and humility. Faith, because we must trust that God is at work, even when we don't see immediate results. Humility, because we must admit that we cannot handle everything on our own. This act of letting go is not a one-time decision but a daily practice. As Lewis wrote, relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. Each day presents new challenges, and each day requires a fresh commitment to trusting God instead of being consumed by anxiety. In The Problem of Pain, Lewis also addresses the role of suffering and difficulty in the Christian life. He argues that suffering often draws us closer to God by making us more aware of our need for Him. When we hold on to anxiety, we resist this process. We try to solve our problems through our own strength, but this only deepens our worry. In contrast, when we trust in God's providence, we find that He is with us in our suffering, guiding us through it. Lewis believed that peace comes not from the absence of difficulties, but from knowing that God is with us through them. To experience this peace, we must practice letting go of our anxieties and trusting God with every aspect of our lives. This act of surrender is deeply connected to the Christian concept of grace, acknowledging that we cannot earn or control everything, but that God freely gives us what we need. In conclusion, C.S. Lewis taught that anxiety is a barrier to the peace God offers, and holding on to it reflects a lack of trust in His promises. Letting go of worry requires both faith and humility, and it is through this act of surrender that we experience true peace. By relying on God's grace and trusting in His providence, we open ourselves to the deep and lasting peace that comes from living in alignment with His will. Faith needs to be renewed every day. C.S. Lewis often emphasized the importance of renewing our trust in God each day. He believed that relying on God is not a one-time act but an ongoing process that must be repeated daily. This idea is central to his understanding of faith, where each day offers a new opportunity to trust God and surrender our burdens to Him. In Mere Christianity, Lewis writes about the daily struggle of faith. He compares it to starting fresh every morning, as if nothing had been done the day before. This renewal of trust is necessary because our faith, like any relationship, can wane over time if it is not actively nurtured. Lewis understood that life presents us with new challenges, fears, and anxieties each day, and with each new challenge, we are called to trust God anew. It is in this daily act of trust that we deepen our relationship with Him and learn to lean on His strength rather than our own. Lewis also recognized that our human tendency is to hold on to control. We often try to manage our worries, thinking that if we work hard enough or plan thoroughly, we can avoid difficulties. But Lewis points out that this mindset is flawed because it leaves little room for God's guidance and intervention. In his view, true peace and relief from anxiety come only when we are willing to hand over our burdens to God, trusting Him with both the small and the large concerns of our lives. This daily renewal of faith, as Lewis describes, is not always easy. It requires humility, a willingness to admit that we are not in control, and faith, the confidence that God is both willing and able to help us. One of the reasons Lewis insists that this trust must be renewed daily is because each day brings with it new temptations and trials. We may trust God one day, only to find ourselves worrying and trying to take control again the next. Lewis understood that human nature is prone to forgetfulness and doubt, and for this reason, our trust in God must be an intentional and repeated act. In The Problem of Pain and Other Works, Lewis explores how suffering and difficulty are often the means by which we learn to trust God more deeply. When life is going smoothly, it can be easy to think we are self-sufficient. But in times of hardship, we are reminded of our limitations and our need for God. These moments of difficulty, Lewis believed, are opportunities for us to practice the kind of daily reliance on God that he advocates. Instead of resisting or fearing these challenges, we are called to see them as opportunities to renew our faith and deepen our trust in God's plan. The idea that faith must be renewed every day aligns with the Christian understanding of grace. Grace is not something we earn or achieve through our own efforts, it is a gift from God that is offered to us anew each day. Similarly, our trust in God is something we must choose to renew each day, knowing that God's grace is sufficient for whatever we face. Lewis believed that by making this choice daily, we not only experience peace in the present but also grow in our faith over time. In conclusion, C.S. Lewis's teaching on the daily renewal of trust in God highlights the ongoing nature of faith. Trusting in God is not a one-time event but a daily practice that requires humility, faith, and the willingness to surrender control. As we face new challenges each day, we are invited to trust God afresh, knowing that He is always present, always capable, and always ready to bear our burdens. Fear obscures faith. C.S. Lewis, in his profound reflections on faith and the human condition, often addressed the impact of fear and anxiety on our relationship with God. He argued that worry is not just a natural response to life's uncertainties but also a reflection of a deeper issue, a lack of trust in God's plan. When we let anxiety dominate our thoughts, we are essentially expressing doubt in God's ability to guide our future and care for our needs. Lewis saw this as a fundamental conflict between faith and fear, where worry distorts our perception of God's promises. According to Lewis, anxiety arises when we try to maintain control over aspects of our lives that are beyond our power. We want to predict, plan, and secure the future, believing that through our own efforts, we can avoid pain or hardship. However, this desire for control is, in itself, a denial of God's sovereignty. By clinging to worry, we are indirectly suggesting that we can manage better than God, and this mindset draws us away from the peace that faith in God can bring. Lewis believed that our obsession with controlling the future stems from our inability to fully trust in God's goodness. We may acknowledge that God is powerful, but we hesitate to surrender because we fear that His plan might not align with our personal desires. This tension between faith and self-reliance is where anxiety takes root. Instead of releasing our worries into God's hands, we hold on to them, convinced that we can somehow manipulate outcomes or shield ourselves from potential suffering. In Mere Christianity and Other Works, Lewis emphasized that trusting in God requires us to let go of this illusion of control. He pointed out that human beings are finite and limited in their understanding, while God is infinite and all-knowing. This fundamental difference between us and God should be a reason to trust Him more, not less. After all, if God sees the bigger picture and has a plan for our ultimate good, then why should we let fear cloud our faith? Yet, as Lewis notes, we often fall into the trap of doubting God's intentions, especially when His plans involve discomfort or difficulty. Lewis argued that anxiety is ultimately a misplaced form of faith in the negative. Instead of trusting that God will provide and protect, we place our faith in potential disasters and worst-case scenarios. This, Lewis believed, is a distortion of what true faith should be. Faith, in its purest form, is about trusting in the unseen goodness of God, even when we cannot understand His ways. Worry, on the other hand, is faith directed towards fear, anticipating harm rather than trusting in divine provision. One of the key insights Lewis offers is that anxiety does not just disrupt our present peace but also prevents us from experiencing the fullness of life that God intends for us. When we are consumed by worry, we are not living in the present but are instead projecting our fears into the future. This not only robs us of joy in the moment but also diminishes our capacity to see and appreciate God's work in our lives. Lewis believed that the antidote to anxiety is not just a passive hope that things will get better but an active, daily renewal of trust in God. He encouraged believers to make a conscious choice to surrender their fears to God every day, trusting that His plan, even if unknown or difficult, is ultimately for their good. This act of faith requires humility, a recognition that we do not have all the answers and that we must rely on God's wisdom and grace. In conclusion, C.S. Lewis saw anxiety as a sign of insufficient faith in God's plan. He believed that fear distracts us from trusting in God's providence and leads us to try to control a future that is not ours to manage. For Lewis, the solution to anxiety is found in daily surrender, where we choose to place our trust in God's care, letting go of our need for control and embracing the peace that comes from faith. Focus on the present. C.S. Lewis emphasizes the importance of focusing on the present moment and not being consumed by worries about the future. He underscores a central teaching in Christian faith, living in the present and trusting in God's provision for each day. The notion that each day has its own set of challenges is a powerful reminder to manage our concerns within the context of today rather than becoming overwhelmed by potential problems that lie ahead. Living in the present moment, as highlighted by Lewis, is crucial for maintaining inner peace and well-being. The constant anxiety about tomorrow can detract from our ability to enjoy and fully engage with today. This aligns with the teachings of Jesus, who advised against worrying about the future, as encapsulated in the well-known scripture from Matthew 6 verse 34, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." This biblical passage reassures believers that it is unnecessary to borrow troubles from the future, as each day presents its own set of issues that we need to address in the moment. Lewis also reinforces the idea that God promises to provide sufficient strength and grace for each day's trials. This promise is foundational in Christian faith, suggesting that God's support is tailored to the specific needs of each day. By focusing on today and trusting in God's daily provision, believers are encouraged to release their anxieties about the future and place their trust in God's ongoing care. This trust is not just about acknowledging God's power but also about experiencing His grace in real time, which helps believers handle the difficulties they face each day. In practical terms, this focus on the present can be liberating. When we concentrate on the challenges and responsibilities of today, we can better manage our stress and avoid the paralyzing effect of future uncertainties. This approach encourages a proactive rather than a reactive mindset, where we address issues as they arise and rely on God's strength to navigate them. By doing so, we align ourselves with a more productive and faith-driven approach to life, where each day is an opportunity to experience God's presence and support. Moreover, the concept of managing daily concerns rather than being overwhelmed by future possibilities encourages a sense of balance and perspective. It helps believers avoid the trap of letting their minds wander into what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Instead, they are invited to focus on their current tasks and challenges, trusting that God will meet their needs in each moment. In summary, C.S. Lewis's message to focus on the present and trust in God's daily provision resonates deeply with Christian teachings. It serves as a reminder to live fully in each day, addressing today's issues with the confidence that God will provide the strength and grace needed to face them. By adhering to this principle, believers can alleviate the burden of future anxieties and experience a more peaceful and fulfilling relationship with both their daily lives and their faith.